Welcome to the golden moments of the Addictions, Alcoholism, and Three Principles Zoom group meetings. Greg Suki and myself, Harry Derbitsky, are co-hosts of this show, and we have been extremely pleased with the teachings, the help it's provided, the great group interaction, fantastic guests, and the valuable teachings of the three principles as uncovered by Sydney Banks. I wanted to create this series as a teaching tool and a resource to people who are teaching addiction, and also to people who are still troubled by addiction and can't find that happiness and contentment within themselves to the degree where they either let go of the addiction or have far less of it. So what I came up with along with Greg's assistance was to take 15 to 25-minute video series and produce it into a course teaching tool and highlight certain things such as the wisdom of Sydney Banks, the spiritual and psychological nature of the principles, the power of group discussions and insights shared, the great guests, a tremendous variety of guests and approaches, and also we wanted to discuss areas in addiction that perhaps other 3P circles are not actively discussing, including we talked for example, about AA and the 12 steps in regards to the three principles, and that was a great show, really a fantastic show. So let's begin. Enough talk, let's begin. Video 1 is going to be a short reading by Dr. Keith Blevens about Sydney Banks on his yet-to-be-released book. That is Keith's book. And secondly, followed by Joe Bailey, who talks about the evolution of addiction recovery and also his own personal journey with Sydney Banks. Video 2 will be 3 remarkable stories, absolutely remarkable stories of recovery by my co-host, Greg Suki, Christian McNeil, who was a guest facilitator, and a participant, Tanya Evans. So sit back, relax, enjoy, and I hope video 1 and video 2 whet your appetite. Thank you.
This is Sydney Banks writing. In the fall of 1973, I had an enlightening experience and realized the existence of a world that very few people know exists. From that moment on, I walked into a world that is invisible to the naked eye. So powerful was my experience, all the negative feelings and sadnesses that had plagued me for 42 years vanished like the mist in the morning sun. This was the day I realized all my sadness and negative feelings were all created from my own thinking. I had freed myself from all my past negative experiences. At that moment, I knew deep in my heart, if anyone could realize for a fact that we live in a world of thought, they too would find the happiness they were searching for. What I found that day was so simple, yet so powerful, it boggles the mind. I found the three principles that are the missing link: psychology, the mental sciences, psychiatry, and the whole world has long been searching for. I knew instantly this answer could heal millions of people who were suffering needlessly. So, such an uncovering, and such an unlikely person in a way, but who knows how greatness comes to a person? You know, I certainly don't. I don't think Sid had any ever had any notions that he did anything to deserve it or manufacture it or create it. It just dawned on him, and that's the way he always talked about it. And so these principles dawning on Sydney Banks that were predicted in an interesting sort of way by William James 81 years earlier. William James said psychology has no principles. And then he said, but when they come, he knew that psychology had to be a natural science like chemistry or physics, but we had no science of the mind, which is what he called, what he defined psychology as, the science of mental life, which I think is a beautiful definition. And he said, when those principles come, and come they someday surely will, it will be the greatest single discovery in the history of humankind, because it will mean mental health for the world.
First met Sid back in 1980, 38 years ago, I was really, that was my whole work, was working in the addiction field. I had worked as a trainer. I'd worked as the state prevention coordinator for alcoholism for the state of Texas. I'd worked at the Johnson Institute as a trainer for them. They pioneered the whole field of intervention and working with families, the whole family involvement in the recovery process. And, but I was pretty burned out because it was hard work. You know, the way that I was trained to work in addiction was that you were kind of battling the disease. That people had this disease that had overtaken their true nature, and that you had to break through the shell of that resistance, the ego defenses, through a lot of confrontation, often a lot of judgment, a lot of painful process-oriented therapy, taking people back into their past, getting, kind of rubbing their nose in what they had done, a lot of shaming. It was a very kind of gloves off approach to treatment. And I just kept thinking, there's got to be a better way. This is really hard on people who are sincerely wanting to get well. And there's a hell of a lot of fallout from this. Not very many people are getting well. There's a lot of people dropping out of treatment, dropping out of therapy, dropping out of their groups. There's got to be a more gentle, loving, understanding approach. So I was always on the lookout for something, anything that would make the therapy easier for my clients in addiction, but also for me, because, when you're kind of like doing surgery before anesthetic, you're going to have a lot of flailing arms and people hitting you because they don't have an anesthetic. And so the surgeon often got hit by the patients. And it was much like that in the addiction field. It was a lot of negativity. And if you walked in a traditional treatment center, 12-step, usually 12-step based, the mood in the place was very glum. It was very heavy. There was a lot of burnt out people. There was a lot of really good people too, with really good hearts. And I don't mean to judge that, because I've seen incredible transformations happen in spite of the misunderstanding. There's been tremendous insight, revelation, transformation through 12-step programs, traditional treatment, etc. But I just knew, that first rule for physicians is do no harm. I felt like in many ways I was harming people as much as I was helping people. And so when I met Sid and Scotty and a few small group of people down there in Coral Gables, Florida in 1980, the first thing that struck me was that these people had a light heart, a joyfulness, and a true happiness about them that I had not witnessed in my professional colleagues for a long time. We were a pretty serious lot, we psychologists and addiction counselors. And so something was very attractive to me about that, even though I was very cynical and skeptical. It sounded like Pollyannish positive thinking. It sounded like New Age voodoo or something. And I was very cynical, as I said a minute ago. And so I was kind of closed-minded. But luckily for me, my heart won over my brain. And I was completely taken by Sid's presence, mostly his presence, his certainty, his humor, his joy, his absolute knowing of the truth. It shook me up big time. But when I heard him and I started to have my own insights after that weekend exposure, and I started seeing the power of the simplicity of seeing thought in the moment as the foundation of my emotions, my experience, my perceptions, everything. It was the whole ball of wax, was my power of my mind and thought and consciousness to create my experience. And it wasn't just a bunch of words. It was like I would be all caught up in my stress and being frenetic, and then I would have a moment of awareness of that, and it would just dispel the feeling. And I was back to this beautiful feeling that I had experienced when I was on that first seminar weekend with Sid. It was portable. It wasn't about Sid. It was about what was in me, that it was waking up something in me. And because I love working with people with addiction, I just fell in love with addicts and alcoholics big time, I guess because I had a whole family of them and was married to one. I just fell in love with people who had suffered so much with addiction. And I wanted to bring this understanding to that field. So that was what I was most passionate about. And that led to me writing the Serenity Principle about 8 years later, I guess it was. And it was longer ago than that. It was about 18 years later that I actually got the book published in 1990. But ever since then, that book, I keep getting emails from people on how it's touched them and how it's changed their life. And I know it's the power of the three principles paradigm that is waking up the serenity within people, the mental health within people. So it's been my joy and my passion to bring this to treatment centers and addiction counselors for the last 35 years. That's a lot of what my work has been about. I've worked in other areas as well, in healthcare and generally the health of the helper, whether you're in social services or medical professions or schools or lots of different fields. But my heart always comes back to addiction because it's my calling. I don't know. It's because it's what I'm called to do. So what I want to talk about today, and then I really want to have a discussion because this is really juicy and really good group of people here. What I want to talk about is not only the evolution of the field, but why this will transform the field of addiction to a gentler, more helpful, less painful form of treatment that more readily gets to the absolute point of treatment, which is transformation. When Bill W. wrote to Carl Jung back in the 30s, when he was trying to figure out a way to pass on the transformational spiritual awakening he had to other alcoholics, Dr. Carl Jung wrote back to him and said, the only way that he said, psychoanalysis does not work with addicts, with alcoholics. I've never seen it work. The only thing that I've seen that works is when someone has had a transformation, a shift to a higher level of consciousness, an awakening of sorts, whether it be through religion, through close contact with friends, or lastly, through an education of the mind beyond the confines of mere rationalism. And what he meant by that was not just an intellectual understanding of the mind and how it worked, but a personal, insightful transformation that enlightened a person to be free of their addiction. And that the only cure for addiction is that awakening experience. So all of the efforts from the beginning, the early days of AA to the present day have been about how do we find a better way to help people wake up that spirit that is within them, that purity of mind. And when I was about to publish the Serenity Principle, as an aside here, I met with Dr. Dan Anderson, who was the founder of Hazelden, which was the first, to my knowledge, the first inpatient treatment center in the world. It was in Center City, Minnesota. And I went to warn him that when my book came out a month later, it might create some controversy. And he told me, he says, well, didn't you hear? Didn't you get our letter? And I said, what letter? And he says, well, we've decided not to publish your book. I said, seriously? This is like 3 weeks before publication. He says, yeah, we sent out pre-publication copies to all of our staff. And we have 80, 90 counselors on staff. 40 said they would walk out in mass if we published your book. So I was a little disheartened, but I thought, wow, this is some powerful stuff. If it would create that kind of a ripple effect. I said, so what did you think, Dr. Anderson? And he says, well, I loved your book, but it's about 20 years ahead of its time. And we can't afford to lose 40 counselors. So we had to stop the book. And I said, so what did you like about it? And he said, well, number one, it unified all the addictions. Instead of treating mental health and gambling and pot and drugs and alcohol all in separate programs, it unified that. It showed the common denominator of insecurity as the basis of all addictions. The second thing, it unified prevention and treatment and aftercare under one philosophy, one common denominator. And he says, what we always look for in our clients when they go through Hazelden is when that light bulb goes off and you can see it in their face and you know it to be true that they've had an experience. Something has shifted and now they're on the road to recovery. And it didn't happen very often. It doesn't happen often enough, but I think what you are writing about in this book is kind of the science behind that light bulb coming on. I'm paraphrasing here. But there's something about, and then that was my experience. I'd been in Al-Anon, I'd been a member of Al-Anon for many years. And I was always trying to let go and let God and turn it over and surrender and let go of my control. And I had no idea it was all about thought. That was just the missing piece. And so for me, what were just slogans in the 12-step programs. Sid Sydney uncovered the science behind those slogans, behind the truth that is in AA, that is in Christianity, that is in Buddhism, that is in every religion, that is really in every human being. The truth is there. But the simple way that Sid explained how life works from the inside out, that we're living in a world of thought from birth to death, and that all we're ever feeling in the moment is our thinking in the moment. That's it. I mean, that's kind of it. And we're already designed perfectly. We're complete. We're whole. We have everything we need. The wisdom is within. And so when we work with guests like at Gulf Breeze, the treatment center I'm currently working with most closely, all we're looking for is insight. Everything we do, from good food, a lighthearted staff that's caring and compassionate and non-judgmental, people treating everyone there with respect, including their fellow staff, modeling that, good detoxification, good medical help, great education, great materials, videos, etc. All of that is just superfluous to the main point, which is insight. When that light bulb goes off and a person has an experience of their innate well-being, their innate health, what we refer to in the AA program as the serenity within. That union with God, or union with the divine, or union with universal mind is what we hope will happen. And for me, the three principles will revolutionize the treatment of addictions